Thank you for joining us today. This is our second virtual community conversation in our series for this summer. We've decided to do this series as kind of a way to continue to engage our visitors and supporters during this unfortunate time while we're closed and social distancing, etc. Before we go any further though, I did want to pass it over to Dan Mason, our Assistant Director, to kind of give a welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and joining in this second virtual community conversation. As Claire said, just during these odd times, we're working to make sure that we stay connected as a historic New Harmony community, making sure that we're working to live into the vision of prompting thoughts and progressive thought and education and inspiration. And if you were able to join in our last conversation about Mrs. Owen, I hope you enjoyed that. We got some great feedback. It is posted on our playlist on USI's YouTube channel. This too will be recorded, and we have many more topics to come. Let me just take a second to thank the USI team working hard, Claire and everyone for helping make these happen. And I thank our distinguished speakers for their time and helping with the conversation. And thank you all for all of your continued support of Historic New Harmony. If we can ever do anything to make your visit here to Utopia any better, don't hesitate to let us know. And please tell all of your friends. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Claire.
So I'm just gonna quickly kind of introduce our topic as well as our guest speakers today. So as I said, I am Claire Eagle. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at Historic New Harmony. And one of my main roles is to really strengthen kind of the relationship between New Harmony and the University of Southern Indiana. And we are absolutely doing that with some of our guests today. So first we have Dr. Michael Struzeski. He is an Associate Professor of Anthropology at USI. And we have had the fortunate pleasure of having him complete several archaeological digs in New Harmony. We have Dr. Casey Harrison. He's a professor of history and director of the Center for Communal Studies at USI. And his focus will be more on the two utopias that we had here in New Harmony and the aspects of their community. And then finally, we have Andrew Wilson. He is a former New Harmony Town Council member, a community organizer, as well as a business owner. And he is on our advisory board for Historic New Harmony as well. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and give it over to Dr. Struzeski.
Thank you. I'm gonna put my screen up here. Let's see. There we go. Can you see that all right?
Yep, there it is.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, so I was asked to talk a little bit about the sort of prehistory of New Harmony. Just to kind of introduce myself, first, I'm an archaeologist. I work at USI and done a number of projects in New Harmony. We did excavations at the Harmless Dormitory 1 and Harmless Dormitory 2. And the Harmonious Pottery Kiln and Fauntleroy House. But I want to focus today on a project that involves the prehistory, as I said, of New Harmony, which is not, I guess, all that appreciated. You know, if you walk into the Harmonious Cemetery, which this photo is here, you can see that there's some, you know, lumps, some lumpy spots there. Those are Native American mounds. But what exactly do we know about those mounds and who built them? Well, that's kind of what I was looking to answer in a project that I did a few years ago. Let's see if we get the slide to flip here. Oh, there we go. All right, so the first kind of acknowledgement of these mounds was by Charles Alexander Lesueur, who was, of course, a member of the Owenite community. Around 1826 or so, he made a map of the mounds, and you can see these little dots here on the map. Those are all the mounds that he recorded. This over here is the Harmonist Church, And this is basically the outline of the cemetery, the Harmony Cemetery. So you can see that there are mounds within the cemetery itself, but there are also quite a few that lay outside of the cemetery. So the Athenaeum is kind of right about here. And then, can you see you can see my arrow, can't you? Nod, Claire, if you can. Okay, good. Thank you. So the Athenaeum is across the street over here, and then there was a mound right outside the corner of the cemetery, and then a number of other places throughout the town. Now, Lesueur did excavations at some of these mounds in 6 different places, actually, which he numbered like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And he found some burials in the mounds, as you probably expect, and some other artifacts, but we don't know a whole lot about what he found in the mounds. He did provide some little bit of a description there, but this was 1826, so it wasn't a controlled excavation like we do today. These 2 artifacts, we can pretty much guess what they are. The one on the left is probably a chunky stone, dates to the Mississippian period, and the one on the right is an Adena cone that dates to what we call the early woodland period, about I don't know, 2,500 years ago. So even though he didn't know what they were at the time, we can kind of figure that out now. These are some pipes that apparently were found in New Harmony, in the mounds or in the vicinity thereof, that were illustrated in another book. So we had some bits and pieces of knowledge about what the mounds were all about and who was living there. And this is an overlay that I did of New Harmony and the mounds on Lesueur's map of the mounds. And you can see, as I said, that most of the mounds lay within the cemetery itself. There was one in the backyard of this house, which is no longer there. The one that I said was across the street from the Athenaeum. This one's in the back of the USI guest house. This one's underneath that nice brick house there, used to be there. And then there's a few others that are south of that. But they're pretty much, the ones outside of the cemetery are pretty much all gone. They were destroyed over the last couple hundred years. This is a LiDAR map that I made. LiDAR is basically like satellite data that records micro changes in elevation. This is inside the cemetery, which is shown by this black square here. And you can see these 5 lumps right there. Those are these 5 mounds that Lesueur recorded. And then there's some other kind of minor elevations inside there that are probably some of those other mounds that Lesueur recorded as well. So they're still around. They may not be as tall as they once were 200 years ago, but they're still there. So to kind of bring us to the project that I was working on, we didn't do any digging in the cemetery, of course. We didn't want to, find any people. But what we wanted to do was to kind of figure out who was there, who may have built the mounds, what time period, et cetera. These things happen. And so we put excavation units all around the perimeter of the cemetery, some over by the Fauntleroy house, and in the backyards of all these houses going along West Street, and then quite a few units in the northwest corner of the cemetery, and then 4 small units over here. This is kind of an oval grassy area that's just north of the entrance to the bridge, right? We put 4 small units over there also. So that's the extent of our excavations. So what we found out was that there are 3 major occupations at the area. One of which was a culture called Crab Orchard. That's what archaeologists call it. But it was around 100 AD or so. I don't have any carbon-14 dates for this occupation, but based on the pottery, I'm pretty sure it was about 100 AD. It's a time period we call the early middle woodland. These are diagnostic artifacts from the Crab Orchard occupation. So there's these kind of wide blades. These are made out of chert from Harrison County. And these 2 here, the 2 white ones, are chert from Illinois. It's called Burlington chert. So we can get some idea about trading of raw materials to make stone tools. These are some of the sherds we found in the course of our work. This is Crab Orchard pottery. It's kind of thick, clunky looking stuff, kind of ugly looking, I guess you might say, but it's distinctive with these nodes that are found on the exterior of the pottery. You can see these little bumps on the outside of the pottery. Those are pretty distinctive Crab Orchard way of doing things. There's a little bit more Crab Orchard pottery without the nodes, but as you can see, it's kind of thick and crudely made stuff. So this map here shows the distribution of crab orchard stuff around the cemetery. And as you can see by these little green squares, you know, the lighter ones are fewer artifacts and the darker ones are more artifacts. But it's kind of distributed all around. It's not shown on this map, this area over here, the density here. But nonetheless, the general pattern was that there was crab orchard stuff kind of all over this area, but not in huge quantities. I mean, we didn't find any structures, we didn't find any storage pits or hearths or anything like that that would indicate like that there are a whole bunch of people living there. I'm kind of under the impression that this area was visited by crab orchard peoples, possibly in the context of building the mounds. That is, this was a special place where the mounds were constructed, where leaders of the community were buried, and people visited these areas for perhaps funerals, feastings, ceremonies, but they were there for a relatively short period of time, and then they went back to their, you know, their residences that were located elsewhere. So this place was probably visited over and over again by crab orchard people in the context of building mounds and the ceremonies associated with that. So the second occupation was a culture called Allison. I do have one carbon date from that occupation. It's about 350 to 400 AD. And it's a time period we call the late middle woodland. So these are just some tools that are associated with the Allison culture. These are blades. They're skinnier blades. These are the Allison blades. They're also made out of this Wyandotte chert from Harrison County. Here's a couple of spear points that were associated with that occupation also. Here's some Allison pottery we found around the cemetery. Again, you can see it's quite different from the crab orchard stuff I just showed you. There's these little divots in the top, these kind of pie crust rims that were made on the pottery. There's a little bit of decorated stuff that's very, very similar to stuff that's found from the man side. If anybody knows anything about archaeology, the man side is about 15 miles away, and about 15% of the pottery found at New Harmony appears to be man site or man-related materials, which shows some contact between those two sites. Right, now here's a distribution of Allison stuff, and you can see on the eastern side, there's really almost nothing over there. Where we really found all the Allison stuff was in the northwest corner over here. But again, no structures, no pits, no hearths or anything like that, which really again tells me that this place was probably being visited periodically in the context of building mounds, right? So, you know, I don't know exactly which mounds were built by which culture and all that sort of stuff, but I'm pretty well sure that the mounds were built by either the Allison people or the crab orchard people or both, right? So the third occupation then is one that's related to, it's similar to the stuff that you find at Angel Mounds. And it's an Angel Face, Mississippian habitation component. It's a carbon date we got from there. It places it between about 1225 and 1255, right? There's a few sherds here from that occupation, and then over here these are arrow points that are related to that occupation as well, right? These are the only ones that are actually arrowheads for arrows. But the Mississippian stuff was not found hardly at all anywhere except down here over by the bridge. When we were doing excavations over there, a few test excavations, we found some remains of what we were pretty sure is a structure. We came down on this area where it was a whole bunch of burned material, charcoal, and upon excavation, we found a number of posts. You can see this line of posts here that we found that we think probably represents the corner of a structure, right? So it's a little bit different than what we were seeing with the Allison and the crab orchard occupations. So kind of sum up what we found. Crab orchard stuff was first, about 8100 or so. Pretty light occupation, no structures or pits, but intermittent use related to mounds, I think is probably what we're looking at there. Then the second one, as I said, was Allison, where we got more artifacts. So there's more people doing stuff, I guess you could say. But again, no structures or pits, and probably use of the area related to the construction of the mounds, right? And then the Mississippian is much different. These guys are probably living there, right? There's evidence of a structure I'm guessing probably a small habitation, maybe a family or two. And this is right at the edge of the terrace overlooking the Wabash River. So I'm guessing they probably had their fields down down towards the Wabash. Their crops are being grown down there, and then they lived up on the terrace so they wouldn't get flooded out, right? Now we also know that there's some burials. There were Mississippian burials that were found in the area northwest of the cemetery. They were found by LeSueur in the 1820s. So we know now that people were probably living in that terrace area right by the bridge and then burying their dead a little bit farther to the north, right? So that's just a real short summary of what the prehistory of New Harmony is, according to the work that we've done there. So.
Hi, Mike. I just had a few questions I just kind of wanted you to touch on real quick. Can you speak to how these digs benefited USI students that participated in them?
Yeah, the work that we did was all done as part of a field school or multiple field schools. So every summer when there's no pandemic, we do a field school where we take students out and we teach them about excavation. And we've done, I don't know, 4 or 5 in New Harmony, various sites in New Harmony. So every summer we bring about 10, 12 students out and they get experience learning how to do excavation and recording, making maps and recording what they found. So it's a great experience for them because it's real hands-on, obviously. And it's one of those things that's, I think at least, one of the things that they really remember about being at USI is doing field school because it's so unique and it's doing archaeology, a lot different than sitting in a classroom.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So next we're going to hear from Dr. Casey Harrison. As I mentioned earlier, he is the director of the Center for Communal Studies at USI. And he's going to talk a little bit about kind of the inhabitants that we discuss the most in New Harmony, the Harmonists and the community led by Robert Owen.
Yeah, hi, thanks Claire and Daniel for inviting me to participate in this. As Claire mentioned, I'm a historian at the University of Southern Indiana. I also direct the Center for Communal Studies. And if anybody's interested, I can say more about that at some point. I'm not, in terms of history, I'm not an expert on New Harmony, but I can say a few things about the context, short-term, maybe a little bit of the long-term context that's sent German Harmonists and then Owen and his group to Southwest Indiana. I've got a couple of slides to illustrate this. And really just, I think, some general points to start with, maybe some obvious things. The fact that the Harmonists and Owen are obviously Europeans. They're working in a particular time frame. They both make it to Southwest Indiana in the first quarter of the 19th century. I think for the Harmonists, the German Harmonists, there are some long-term historical factors that prepared for them to leave Southwest Germany and then head to the United States, and then maybe some short-term factors that sent Owen and some of his like-minded fellows to Southwest Indiana. Maybe to begin with the Harmonists first, I have a PowerPoint map up here and it shows Europe in 1815. So this is after the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte. Maybe another general point to begin with before I talk about the Harmonists, another distinction, something similar between the Harmonists and Owen, of course, is that they're Europeans and they both come to Southwest Indiana. In the first quarter of the 19th century, something that's different between the two groups is that the Harmonists are motivated especially by religious ideas, and Owen is a secular personality and a secular thinker. They both end up establishing a communal society at New Harmony, but with different sorts of motivations and some purposes, in fact. The Harmonists are from Southwest Indiana. Their leader, I think, is probably well known from among some of you is Father Rapp. Rapp came from a Pietist tradition, and the Pietists emerged really from the turmoil of the religious wars, the religious civil wars, the sectarian wars that racked Europe, beginning in the 16th century. That religious warfare didn't really end until the mid 17th century. And one result is a Germany that's quite divided, in some areas devastated from the wars that racked that territory. As you can see from this map, there is no united Germany. Germany doesn't become a single united country until 1871, fairly late. And even by the late 17th century, there's something like 300 different German states and principalities. That was narrowed down to about 35 by 1815. Rapp and his group came from Württemberg. It's in southwest Germany. It's fairly independent, mostly inhabited by Lutherans. And so Württemberg had been racked by the sectarian strife of the 16th to 17th century, like other parts of Germany. One result of that is Pietist groups who are Christians, Lutheran Christians. They emphasize sort of personal faith, and a lot of them are millennials. They think the second coming of Christ is imminent. And Rapp's group is like that. They want to act pretty independently. They mostly live in villages in southwest Germany and Württemberg. They're at odds with the local government by the late 18th century. Rapp himself spends a little bit of time in prison. By the time he gets out around 1800, he's ready to leave southwest Germany. He purchases property in Pennsylvania, explores the territory, and then moves a group of several hundred followers to western Pennsylvania, a place that he'll name Harmony. And they arrive in Pennsylvania in 1804. They're there for 10 years. They prosper. They end up moving to southwest Indiana, setting up a new communal society there, Harmony. It's mostly agricultural, but also engages in artisanal work as well. And so the Harmonists, like other communal groups, tend to operate in terms of both farming and artisanal work. The Harmonists are there until 1814. They're ready to move back to Pennsylvania. And they sell the property, the town, to Robert Owen. The other point, I guess I'm looking at my PowerPoint screen now, the other maybe sort of general long-term point to make about the Harmonists is that they are really sort of part of a larger German kind of farming diaspora that begins in the 17th century. And so there are German farming groups, families that moved to other parts of the world, to the Americas, including North America, Southwest Indiana, but eventually to South America as well. But there are also German farming groups that are invited to places like Southern Russia. And so I have on the PowerPoint map here a marker that indicates New Russia. It doesn't show up very clearly, but New Russia is just the area north of the Caucasus, and German settlers, very similar in many ways to Rapp and his group, are invited to move there. And these are fairly new territories that have been cleared essentially by the Russian autocracy of nomadic groups, people called Bashkirs, and then also Cossacks had been cleared from that area. And Germans, farmers move in. They also move a little bit further east to areas along the Volga. And so in that sense, the Harmonists are sort of part of that farming diaspora among some Germans that we see across parts of Europe, Russia, and the Americas. If we can go to the next screen, Claire. It's Robert Owen and some of his friends and followers who purchased the property at Harmony. They rename it New Harmony. Robert Owen comes from a different tradition. he wants to set up a communal society in some ways like the Harmonists, but again, he comes from a different kind of background. He's from Wales in southwest Britain. He comes from a modest background himself, but has an entrepreneurial spirit. There's a lot of energy, kind of a charismatic figure, and makes a career for himself in Manchester in textile production, in the new mills that are popping up across northern England, especially places like Manchester and northwest England, beginning in the late 18th century. This is part of the Industrial Revolution. Begins in England and elsewhere across northern Europe in the mid 18th century. That's founded especially at this time upon textile production. And a lot of the textiles is made from cotton. This cotton comes especially from the Americas and eventually from places like India and Egypt and what becomes Turkey. A lot of this cotton is produced by slave and servile labor. And so Owen's own work is very much tied to a global system of production that sees slaves and other kinds of servile labor produce cotton that then shipped in this global network to places like Manchester and then to New Lanark, where Robert Owen builds another factory, turn it into textiles that then ship back across the world. It's an amazing global system, which Robert Owen is very much a part. And I think in his own writings, his own thinkings about his place in the world, his own tie, direct and indirect, to things like slavery and servile labor is something that prompts him to sort of develop a new moral outlook on the work that he's doing. So he's a product of that Industrial Revolution, in some ways a little bit a product of the Enlightenment. This is an 18th century movement of ideas, and Owen didn't really, I think, apparently didn't read all of the Enlightenment works that were coming out, but he was familiar with some of them and certainly a product of that sort of time and place. The Enlightenment is a movement of ideas that thinks society, sort of essentially thinks society can be reordered along rational lines, that people are born with blank slates. And if we improve society, we can improve lives. You know, sort of a promise of citizenship, higher standard of living, better lives at sort of the core of the Enlightenment. That's very much a part of Owen's own kind of personal makeup. So those are ideas that Owen brings to New Lanark, Scotland. And there he become manager and then owner of a textile mill in New Lanark. He makes it successful. He reorganizes the production at New Lanark to ameliorate a lot of the terrible conditions that had come out of the Industrial Revolution. You know, the kind of conditions that Charles Dickens wrote about, slums and poverty and overcrowding and degraded conditions, and women and children working in terrible factories and men working long hours. Those are things that Owen was very familiar with. He didn't want his factory to be like that. And so he reorganized production at New Lanark to make it a better, healthier place for his workers to live and labor. And he was quite successful at that. New Lanark became a model for a progressive kind of production in the first 2 decades of the 19th century. And eventually he wants to take those ideas elsewhere. He engages in other things, sort of arguments with other sort of thinkers and figures in early 19th century England. And he decides to take some of his plans to the United States. He ends up purchasing the town of Harmony from Rapp, and then proceeds to move some of his friends and like thinkers there. They arrive in New Harmony in 1824. Owen himself is in and out of New Harmony for a couple of years. His kids all eventually arrive and spend a lot of time there, make really New Harmony their home. Owen himself is back permanently pretty much in England by the late 1820s and spends most of the rest of his life debating with others, very interested in religion. He becomes kind of a religious figure himself towards the end of his life, but also continuing to write political works. We associate Owen with the utopian socialists. I have that phrase listed down there on the PowerPoint. And Owen himself may have used the word socialism himself early on, probably one of the first to use this term. And for him, socialism meant a productive society, but a fair productive society that shares and that emphasizes cooperation more than competition. There are other people who come out of this climate, the other utopian socialists. A lot of them French. I had them listed down here. Saint-Simon, Charles Fourier, Etienne Cabet. Cabet did something similar to Owen. That is, he gathered followers in France, Cabet did, and then embarked upon a trip to the United States, and his followers followed them. They set up a communal society, not that different in some ways from New Harmony at Ikari, and this is in Nauvoo, Illinois. His Ikari is set up at Nauvoo, Illinois, just west of New Harmony. But utopian socialist is a phrase very much associated with Owen. It was, the phrase itself was coined by Karl Marx. It was probably first used by Marx in his Communist Manifesto of 1847. And he used it as kind of a critique of Owen and the others. They all sort of fit under the broad umbrella of socialism. But Marx saw himself more as kind of a scientific socialist, and it's sort of a kind of critique that Marx applied to Owen and the others. And eventually, Owen and the others accept the language, and we still associate that phrase utopian socialist with Owen and these others. So there's a little bit of the background, and I'll stop there.
All right, thank you. That was a great little intro there. So we are going to end with our speakers with Andrew Wilson. As I mentioned earlier, he's a former town council member in New Harmony. He is a community organizer as well as a business owner, and he's going to talk a little bit more about kind of today, how we are a utopia today. If you've spent time in New Harmony, you'll know that many residents still call this community a utopia, and kind of where he sees us going in the future.
Thanks, Claire. I actually enjoy my many friends that I have from college, even that ask me from time to time how everything is in utopia. But it's a privilege certainly to speak alongside Mike and Casey about present day New Harmony and where we are going forward. From my lens, Amanda and I's young daughters are the 7th generation to live in New Harmony. And so there's a long history of our family and being here, and a lot of pride certainly with that. But just as an example, Athenaeum was built the year that I was born in 1979, of course, and the historic New Harmony was formed just shortly before that. The New Harmony Business Associates a couple years after 1979, and so I believe that I've grown up in a sense with these organizations that are now really driving the community forward. And so I liken sort of my experience in a way to, if we recall the photographs from the 70s and 80s, and they just because of the technology perhaps, or maybe it's the camera that we used in our family. I look at a photo of New Harmony that we have in our photo albums, and they're just not as vibrant as the ones that I see today. And it's like a totally different community almost from when I was younger and to where it is today. Mike, I'll say that my classmates and I were digging at the former Harmonist church site when we were in kindergarten, which is where the former school sat. So we were doing our own archaeology in a way back in the early 80s at what was New Harmony School, and now as some of you know as Church Park. But so I do believe in a lot of senses, my friend Connie Winesapple has said, that we are in the third experiment of this community, and I believe that our bicentennial was a major catalyst for where we are headed going forward. I'm definitely, I might add, very proud of the perseverance of the community, especially during this phase, and how everybody is banded together. But present day, I think that like many small towns, we are constantly balancing the strength of our small town values and our traditions with this fastly and expanding world that we live in, and trying to communicate that and the benefits of that. I believe that we're doing exceptionally well in that regard. If you look at a lot of our growth, especially over the last 15 years, 18 years since I've been home from school, but the real estate values alone have increased exceptionally. And I think that's driving a lot of our growth in the community. Values increasing in just in the last couple of years, 20 and 30%. And so that's creating a lot of wealth in the community that we are now benefiting from in many ways. Just the way the community looks, the way the community feels, the way that the nonprofit entities especially are working and operating. But property values are definitely on the uptick, and I think that's because people are learning and discovering the community and choosing to locate here. Our business environment is certainly vibrant. It's something that is encouraging in a lot of respects. I think we have many decades-long businesses that are still operating from the same location on our main streets. And so that continuity is important, of course, for any community we've got, but at the same time, we have new fresh businesses popping up as well. But they're a pretty cohesive group. We have a very healthy artisan culture that I think is really helping to spur a lot of creativity in the community. And I find my own daughters even really enjoying, to be creative now and share their own works just on the front of our house, for example. But our nonprofits are definitely driving a lot of progress. I don't know the exact count, but I know that we have a number of nonprofit entities, each with their respective role in the community. And so it's been said many times that the strength of your nonprofits really determine the health of a community. And but by that factor alone, I believe that New Harmony is flourishing because our nonprofits are there. Just from the garden clubs and the arts and culture groups that are, again, all finding their way in the community. We have an active philanthropy, and by both small and large, but I've studied a little bit about A.C. Thomas over the last year, and A.C. Thomas, was after he had made his wealth, he then the rest of his life as a promoter and cheerleader of New Harmony. And I believe we have modern examples of that right now, some of which are on this call exactly, to be exact. But, I think that we have people that are actively being cheerleaders of New Harmony near and far. And for that, we have to be thankful, because they're putting their dollars, investing their dollars in the community. And it certainly feels good from someone who's living here perspective. But I think people believe that live here, and people that are exploring moving here, that they can, if they have a big idea, that they can come here and they can explore making that a reality. They can swing for the fences, if you will. I think Jim Spann used that example at one time, but I think that they believe that if they can come here, that as Casey mentioned about Robert Owen, that entrepreneurial spirit is definitely alive and well here in the community. So I think, again, that's encouraging a lot of the uptick that we're seeing. Looking forward then, I do believe that it is time that we cast a vision and more cohesive vision, if you will, that we can align around. There is many interpretations of, especially, what Jane Blatford Owen, what her vision was exactly, I think, but she certainly being the leader in casting the vision to where we are today, and it still is playing out going forward. But leveraging our strategic plan, we have that in place. It was kind of a profound moment in my life when I was asked to be involved in the existing strategic planning process, and I then uncovered my grandmother's copy of the strategic plan that she was involved with back in the 70s and or early 80s, I believe it was. And looking through that and seeing all the things that we had accomplished as part of that strategic plan, and using the one that we've already got in place that's crafted to continue to sort of check the boxes and expanding upon that. I think we have to take a proactive approach to our economic development, specifically in the areas of community development, thinking about unique ways to encourage and build businesses here, specific business categories that we think that would flourish here, that would help the town grow. There's been a shift in the economic development space to more community development, making more quality of place. Many things that we already have here. So I think we've got a leg up on other communities because we have those quality of place initiatives already in place, and so I think we can be a little bit more precise in our efforts, especially when it comes to economic and community development. Certainly after the pandemic and what we've recently endured, I think that small towns, I've said this for a while, but I do believe that small towns will have a chance to reemerge. People have now learned that they can work from anywhere, and there's an incredible shift that's happening in the live-work environment. And so therefore, New Harmony, I can't think we have a reliable internet. We have, obviously we have all the quality of place that people can work from anywhere. And I believe that that's something that we can definitely benefit from now going forward, especially after the pandemic. We do have a better quality of life here, I believe. So that's a significant opportunity for the town. I've said before too, we're not trying to attract hundreds of people going forward. We just need dozens of people. And so, we really kind of honing in on the who we're trying to attract, and we don't have to. We're not trying to. Our growth can come more organically, certainly. And I do believe, because it's been an ongoing thing for many years, but this bridge project that we are definitely making significant progress on will be a next big milestone for the community in a lot of ways, just because of all the effort that's been made and what it will mean to the community, what it'll symbolize, and then what it'll add to our environment. So there's definitely, I think, a strong sense of community right now, and I do believe a healthy dose of optimism. So going forward, I believe we're well positioned, but we certainly need to really focus on what it is that casting that vision, if you will, that more cohesive vision. So that's what I have sort of to say, and then I'll be glad to listen along with Mike and Casey if there are any questions.
We do have one that came through the chat, Andrew, and I think this is most suited for you, but of course, if Mike and Casey, if you have anything to add, please do. What do you believe New Harmony's greatest challenge is in the next 3 to 5 years?
Greatest challenge?
Yes.
Well, I believe that the aligning our organizations around that vision and what our growth should be. I hear many people talking about what they'd like for it to be and what they wouldn't like for it to be, and sharing examples of other communities that they would like to emulate and communities that they would not like to emulate. And so I believe that we should really start to get all the players a continual conversation, if you will, about that growth, and because I do believe that we are going to grow.
Great, thank you. And a question for Mike. We see that there were 3 different periods, I guess you would say, of people who used this area, and I think that really there's a reason, obviously, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you think they continuously visited New Harmony.
That particular spot. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Saying like I'm losing my. Okay, sorry. I wish I knew. There are other spots on the landscape that are probably equally, suitable for building mounds, but they chose this spot for some reason to do that. And they came back probably over periods of hundreds of years, meaning that it held some special significance for them. So why exactly they picked that particular spot, I have no idea. For the Mississippian peoples, the last people to live there, Native Americans, that is, it was more of an issue of pragmatic. You find a high spot overlooking the river where there's a place you can put your fields, and that's how they picked that spot, I imagine. But it's kind of hard to get into people's minds from that time ago to figure out exactly why they picked that spot there.
Okay, I actually have another question from you, from someone in our chat. What was one thing, what one thing did you find in your excavations of New Harmony that you did not expect? Something that maybe just didn't belong?
Excavations in New Harmony that I didn't expect. Well, going into archaeology, you never know what to expect. So that's the that's the thing. Let's see. Oh, geez, that's a tough one. Thing I didn't expect. Well, we found the Harmonious pottery kiln. I wasn't sure when we went into that. That was over by where the Lentz house is now. I kind of knew it was there because of the maps, etc., but I wasn't sure exactly if any of it was preserved. And then we wound up finding a large portion of the pottery kiln there in fairly good condition. So that was a pleasant surprise, I suppose. But you find all sorts of, here's an interesting thing that I've found in New Harmony. I have found a whole bunch of little pieces of movable type at a number of sites, like a little F or a little, from printing. New Harmony has this history of printing, and then we found pieces of type at more than one site. So these little bits and pieces of type have been cast out all over the town as they get caught in people's pockets and cuffs and sort of thing, and they drop them here and there around the town. So that was kind of interesting. I always like little things that we find that kind of tell you about individual people and kind of little interesting stories about who these people were, because a lot of times we just don't know much about them as individuals. You read history books and it's kind of these general histories of what happened, but the people themselves are often kind of lost.
All right, that looks to be all of the questions we've had in our chat. So I will give just another chance for anyone to type out a question if they would like to. I'm also going to share my screen again.
Claire, we did have one question from someone joining us asking how we connect with other Harmonist or Owen sites, such as Old Economy or Harmony, Pennsylvania. And my response was, you know, depending on the project, we do try to reach out to those other sites. We do have an opportunity as everything gets back up and running to reconnect and to the best of our ability, help promote that cultural tourism. We have so much to share here in New Harmony beyond our wonderful 1,000-year history. Just even from an architectural perspective, we have 30 or so buildings that we want to make sure that we connect to other regional sites like Columbus, Indiana. So there are several different connect points that we're working to make and take full advantage of, and make sure that people know about this incredible space. We are working with New Lanark. I think there are a few folks from New Lanark, Scotland on today's Zoom on the 250th anniversary of Robert Owen's birth. There's much more to come on that as we work out what we can actually do. But that's on the radar for next year. So we absolutely do work to connect us regionally and internationally.
We also had another question come through from Joseph. He says, I visited the Amana colonies in East Central Iowa. The settlers there were from the same area of Baden-Württemberg as the Rappites. Are there any similarities with them? Oh, Casey, you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, similarities. Germany, Southwest Germany, come from that pietist tradition. I don't think the Rappites and the people from Amana knew each other, or really worked with each other. Similarity is that they were looking for agricultural land in the Midwestern part of the United States. And in some ways, I mean, they worked with communities, they were part of a local market, but in other ways sort of segregated themselves too. But very productive, the Amana colonies near Iowa City. And like the Rappites in Harmony and then back in Old Economy, they lasted a long time. And so the Amana colonies are still sort of going. They've changed quite a bit. They're more integrated now into the local society, but they have many of the same origins. And there were lots of groups, there were lots of rural farming, agricultural groups like this coming out of Germany. And again, a lot of them end up in different parts of the Americas, some in Russia. Some of the Russian Germans, Volga Germans they were called, actually ended up emigrating to Canada and the Midwestern United States in the 19th century. And so they retained their traditions of production, a combination of farming and artisanship, and did fairly well in terms of longevity as far as communal groups go.
Casey, this is Leslie. Since they mentioned Amana and you mentioned a little bit about communal studies, why don't you just tell a little bit about what the Center for Communal Studies is, maybe some of the resources that are there at USI, just give people a little snapshot of what you do.
Okay, sure. I'm a professor in the history department, but I also direct the Center for Communal Studies. It's an agency for the University of Southern Indiana. And the Center for Communal Studies has been around since 1976. It's not directly connected with New Harmony, but it's really sort of inspired by New Harmony. It began in 1976 under Dr. Donald Pitzer, a name very much associated with New Harmony and the history of New Harmony. The center sponsors public events. So we do talks and presentations. We had a conference in New Harmony 4 or 5 years ago. We do colloquium. We're going to have a film and presentation this spring before the pandemic hit. So we do that sort of public programming. We also sponsor prizes, undergraduate and graduate prizes. These are monetary prizes that we offer every year. And so if you are a student, or if you have students, undergraduate or graduate students working on topics related to communal societies, then you're welcome to apply for our prizes. We also sponsor a research travel grant. This is $2,000 every year that brings scholars from across the world to our collection to do research. And another thing that we do at the center is help to maintain a wonderful collection, communal studies collection, archives, manuscripts, records of all sorts, housed in the archives of Rice Library at University of Southern Indiana. This is a very good collection. It's especially strong in 20th century communal societies, lots of hippie communal societies, for example. And so we have lots of scholars come in and work with this collection. So we help maintain that collection at the Center for Communal Studies. And then the most recent thing we've done is to very recently create a minor in communal studies. So we're just getting this off the ground, but students at the University of Southern Indiana can now have a minor, about 18 hours in communal studies. And so that's the things we do. Try to spread the word and keep the idea of communal studies alive.
Great, great. I just do want to note it's about 1:56 and it looks like we might go over that 1 hour mark. So if any of you do have to leave, please remember that this is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube page. But we've got some really great questions that I want to make sure we get to, so we might go over that 2 o'clock time. So I have a Christopher Malone, and I believe he is still on the call. And Christopher, if you would actually like to unmute yourself, why don't you ask this of the whole group? I think that'd be great.
Hi, so I'm currently a fellow at the Winterton Museum doing communal studies. I think I met Mike at the Communal Studies Conference there this year. My thesis this year is going to be on why visitors came to Harmonists and Moravian villages in the 18th and 19th century. So specifically why they came. There seems to be, among different communal groups, this sort of communal tourism that went on. And I was sort of wondering how communal tourism in the 19th century in New Harmony compares to today with today's tourism. Do people come for the same reasons? Do they know who the Harmonists are, who the Owenites are? Are they surprised by what they find out? Is it all about curiosity or commerce, etc.?
Casey, do you want to talk maybe about people that would have visited the communities?
Well, Owen invited lots of people to come visit New Harmony. And these were usually sort of eminent figures, scholars, thinkers, teachers. I don't know if they're exactly tourists. And you know, the kind of familiar tourism industry that we know today probably begins about this time, 1830s, 1840s, and really in sort of other directions. The first sort of tourist destinations were places like Egypt and Greece and Rome. But there are definitely visitors that come to see Owen and at New Lanark. So he has lots of visitors. Nicholas I, the Tsar of Russia, visited New Lanark in order to see what was going on there because it had such a reputation. And eminent figures, I think a few visited New Harmony as well. A little bit harder to get to than New Lanark was. I don't know if maybe Mike knows something about this too. I mean, I don't know if the Harmonists were encouraging visitors to come. I don't know. Some of these communal groups, you know, they're not, they want to be off by themselves in some ways, and sometimes they discourage visitors. So I don't know.
It looks like Mike might have had a problem with his internet. Unfortunately, he's no longer on the call. He might join us back later. Who knows?
Tourism is the right word at this point, Christopher. Maybe a little bit later in the Amana colonies. You know, I think I went to the University of Iowa for my degree there, and it had become sort of a tourist destination by the late 20th century.
It is fascinating that when you're on the tours here in New Harmony, that oftentimes, and I think Claire, you can speak to this as well, you'll have people on the tour who know much more than we do. They've studied it their entire lives. They very much understand the life and times of Robert Owen or Father Rapp. And it's absolutely fascinating. So, you know, Christopher, from my perspective, from Historic New Harmony, I mean, we have people who come because there's something about the soil here. New Harmony tends to pull people who are interested in the spiritual, into the intellectual, the history part of it. So it's kind of all the above. And I think just, you know, the way that the Historic New Harmony and USI present it and care for it is another reason that folks come. But, you know, it's, you definitely have people who come for the spiritual, the labyrinths. I think we have now postponed, but we have the Labyrinth Society coming to celebrate here because we have so many of those. But architecture, we have a Richard Meyer icon, and then again, while we presented here, 1,000 years of history. So all of those combined really make New Harmony special.
And I think you see those exact things happening, people coming for those exact reasons, even spiritual, you know, people interested in the society, perhaps joining and, you know, perhaps not joining. And so I think it's interesting that there's a linkage. I certainly wouldn't call it tourism either in that time period, but it somewhat looks like it, the beginnings of it, even if it's sort of a mass curiosity about this group that doesn't live like other people. And I do plan to come out at some point in the next year before my thesis is up, so hopefully I'll get to visit and see it all.
Yes, well, we'd love to have you, Christopher. And I do kind of want to touch on what you said, that it was a curiosity. People were very intrigued, both about the Harmonists and the Owen community, because there were these things happening here that were grand and new, and people didn't realize that it could happen in this small corner of Indiana. All right, we have, oh, and I did want to point this out. I don't know if y'all saw it in the chat, but Christopher Paget, who is a descendant of one of the founding families of the Harmony Society, said that they still visit because of their ancestral linkage to the Harmony Society and their values. So that's interesting to see. So I think we have one more question from Sadie. And she says she's not trying to downplay what New Harmony is now, but she's heard from many people that New Harmony was an attempt at a utopia that didn't really work and actually failed. And what would that mean to us? Now, I don't know if Casey again wants to address maybe how the Owen community is viewed as failing.
Oh, I don't know. These are hard questions. It's very hard for communal groups to succeed over time. There are lots of more examples of groups that fade out and groups that persist. And if a group stays around for a generation or so, that's by most measures a success. Owen wasn't around a lot. He came and went. And without his presence, this undermined the experiment a little bit. A lot of the people who came with him were not really farmers or artisans. They were thinkers and writers. And the mix between that group and the other arrivals, farmers and artisans, was just ended up being sometimes a difficult mix over the late 1820s. There ended up being some financial disputes over property as well. But in terms of sort of the long-term legacy of the Owen experiment, we're still talking about it. We're here right now talking about it. And in that sense, it hasn't faded out or died. And from a historical perspective, and from terms of a teacher in the classroom, that legacy is really important because we are still talking about it. And in that sense, more of a success than some other communal experiments that come and go very quickly.
All right, well, that seems to be our last. I do want to thank all of you for coming once again. I think this was a really great conversation, and I'm really glad that all of you joined us. I do want to quickly point out what we have upcoming. So for those of you who don't know, Say's firefly is the Indiana state insect, and it's found right here in New Harmony by Thomas Say. His birthday is this Saturday, June 27th, and to celebrate, we're having a special junior history hub, a virtual junior history hub for kids ages 6 to 12 through Zoom, where we're going to talk a little bit about Thomas Say, and then we're going to teach the kids how to make their own firefly catcher. Additionally, on July 9th at 1 p.m. Central, just like today, we are going to have our next virtual conversation, which is going to be New Harmony, a virtual tour. As Dan mentioned, I believe in the beginning, we still do not have our opening plans finalized, but we do know that we've gone too long without giving a tour, and we want to give a tour. So we're going to have our experience coordinator, as well as some of our tour guides, give you a virtual tour. So please join us for those 2 events as well. And of course, stay connected with us. Please visit our website if you have questions. And of course, all of our contact information is on that website. So if you'd like to talk to any of us individually, or if you have specific questions, if we don't know the answer, we'll get you to someone that does. As well as our social media. We do have Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then we just launched a monthly e-newsletter. We just did our first one a couple weeks ago, and we've gotten a really great response of it. So we are, of course, going to continue that, and there'll be a July edition going out soon. So you can sign up for that. There's a pinned post on our Facebook page, or there, of course, is a newsletter page on our website if you would like to go there to sign up. So I think that's all I have. And once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again.
Thanks, everyone.